The New Zealand Business Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, your strategic and proactive IT partner.
Hey folks, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Business Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain, and today we are with Vaughan Fergusson. Vaughan, welcome along to the show. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me along.
Well, this is a story we've been meaning to tell for a long time. We've sort of, been planning to sit down and
life keeps getting in the way.
Hear from you. We've delayed it and got busy with different things, but we're here now. So very exciting to be able to really share a bit of your life journey and drilling into some of the lessons and learnings, the ups and downs of building and selling a $500 million software company from New Zealand, and I think it's going to be pretty interesting. So, thanks for taking the time.
Anytime.
Okay, so always good to get started with a bit of background and where you grew up and what your upbringing was like.
Oh, we're going way back there,
right back to the beginning, because all the dots are connected here, and there are lessons. I think there are often sort of lessons from our early days that impact the decisions and the things that we do, later in life, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what you want to hear. It's like I've had a fairly humble upbringing. 3 brothers. Well, one of 3 brothers, 2 brothers, me and my 2 brothers. Grew up in Pakuranga, East Auckland. Ever since I was a kid, was always fascinated with technology. And I guess I was really fortunate in that, the timing for us, that back then, like when I was a kid, it was back in the 80s. And that's when technology was really, really starting to happen. Like, it was the transition away from black and white to color almost in the world. And then everything started becoming digital. So, I mean, that's kind of my background is, that's kind of what's got me onto this path of where I am today. I think I still remember being 10 or 11 and just knowing that one day I wanted to have my own software business, and the glamour of that. I had no idea what I would do, but having been a kid that grew up around computers, and computers were now just starting to become a thing. I was always totally enthralled by the idea of software. It's like this malleable thing, this magic thing, the magic smoke in the box that you can make pretty much do anything you want.
So did you dabble with writing software and coding at that sort of age at all?
Sure. Back then it was really just sort of like copying out, code from magazines, and punching it in and making little tank games or whatever. But sure, you play around with your own code and, taught myself coding. Me and my brothers all taught ourselves how to code. And then going through school, actually I built a database for school to manage all of the student records. I think there's a fancy name for that now. A student record database or whatever. But I built one for our school, and it was such a heady time of like nothing had been invented yet. It was like the world was just like ripe with possibilities of how technology could really change it. And so and I've just sort of followed that wave ever since I was 10 or 11.
Yep. And any sort of obvious entrepreneurial sort of leanings as a youngster, other than that thought, maybe having a software business one day?
Yeah, I remember Mum taking me down to the local ASB branch, and I made a business plan to buy a laser printer because I wanted to set up my own desktop publishing business. And I think I had CorelDRAW or something. I can't remember. I think it was CorelDRAW, and I taught myself how to use that. And I was convinced that I was going to be able to make flyers and business cards and all these things. So we bought this really expensive laser printer.
Yep.
And had to go down to meet with the bank manager and get the loan approved. I mean, Mum was just putting the loan on the mortgage. So not just, but And and I can't remember how old I was. I was still a teenager, still young.
Yeah.
And remember the branch manager saying, "Okay, we'll give you the money." And then that was the first business I set up. It was called Devon DTP, and had customers. And I don't know if I made any money, but I paid off the printer. So, and I don't think I made anything on top of that. But
well, as I recall, in the 80s, certainly, laser printers were very, very expensive. And yeah, some interesting similarities there that we can catch up on another time outside of the show. But I generated some revenue in a similar space, but I think I was using somebody else's laser printer to do it.
Right.
So there you go.
But because that was like at the time, like the industry was all, I can't remember, it was all, making templates etched in
galleys from a typesetter.
Yeah, using typesetting.
And it was very much, I mean, you were, I guess part of a wave of disruption really by getting involved in that space at that time of digital disruption. So you went through, you did your desktop publishing. What did you do at the end of school? Was this part of that?
There's a very complicated answer to this because it's like, what was the end of school? Because the classic serial dropout. But sort of had the short story is I had a on and off again relationship with computer science at university, and sort of gave it a go, dropped out, gave it another go, dropped out again. But back then, computer science was a relatively new thing, and I was actually doing business computing, which was like, I think it was the first program that AUT ran, which was like, it wasn't computer science, it was like the application of computers and technology in business. So I did that for 3 years, and it never actually got the degree in the end. I wonder if I could go back, and I wonder if I should finish it off.
They'll probably make you go back to square one.
Maybe. I don't know. I think it's all still pretty relevant, the stuff we were learning. Mind you, back then
probably got some pretty good practical experience, Vaughan.
Yeah.
That must count for something.
Absolutely. I think I might have some life skills, some life experience that maybe I could get cross-credited for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll put in a good word for you. I used to tutor there part-time after I'd studied there.
Oh, really?
Yeah. As a teenager.
Yeah.
I was the youngest person in my class.
Oh, really?
But I was teaching it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
was I in your class? Not sure. Trying to think of the dates now. But yeah, it was funny because at the time I was wrestling with the idea. I've always wanted to follow the arts more so than computers, and I always had a passion for photography, and then I had the choice of going to do fine arts at university or this new business computing thing, and I was so close to doing fine arts because I think that was where my heart was really at, but my brain was like, I'm pretty sure there might be good money in this computer stuff. Maybe give it a go, and you can always come back to the fine arts stuff later. And so that was it. And
smart move.
Well, it turned out to be a smart move, and I guess now I can afford, I've been afforded the ability to, if I want to, go back and do the fine arts thing.
Yeah. So that period from studying to when you kicked off Vend, what were the things that occupied you? What were the lessons that you learned along the way and the roles that you did?
Well, I've only just recently come to appreciate that I've pretty much had my whole professional career has been in startups. Except back then, that wasn't really a label that was used. You were just a small business.
That's right.
So when I dropped out of university, I was given a job at a startup, and it was a husband and wife team, Dave and Julie, and they were just getting this thing up off the ground. Just funding it from there, putting it on the house. And worked with them for 5 years, and it was a real startup, and it was just doing whatever you needed to do and building. At the time, this was like almost pre-internet. It was just on the verge of the internet really becoming mainstream. And so I was playing with the internet at home, but at work, it wasn't really a thing that was being used by businesses. Like we still had landlines and a shared dial-up email account that we used,
Gotcha.
And we were doing computer telephony. So we were doing kind of like the internet before the internet, interactive voice response. So back then whenever you wanted to find out your bank balance, you either went into a branch or an ATM, or you picked up the phone and punched in the digits on the on the dial pad and logged into your bank account and had your balance read out to you, and you could do banking over the phone. So we were doing a lot of that. We were doing a lot of stuff with IRD. That's how you would interact with IRD, was via our automated voice response systems, and you could get your emails read to you over the phone and all this cool stuff. And I remember, I mean, it wasn't really a day. It was just more of an ongoing thought at the time. I was like, this stuff over the phone is cool, but like, imagine if you could do all this stuff over the internet. Like, that just seems like obvious. And that's kind of where we started leaning into towards the end, is really the transition away from conducting everything over a phone to like doing stuff in a browser.
Yep.
And so that was kind of like, what would you call that? Your boot camp, 5 years of boot camp of like, this is what startup life is like. And I didn't think anything of it because I just thought that's what a job was. You turned up and you just did whatever you needed to do that day to kind of make money, keep the business going.
And a typical sort of small New Zealand business or startup whereby everybody just did whatever needed to be done. It wasn't necessarily, coded into your job description. You need to do X, Y, Z. Right?
I'm pretty sure I had a job description, but I don't. Yeah, I think it was the same job description for 5 years, and I think I had a job title. Job titles were usually more important for external. It's like when you're talking to, and then you'd probably have 3 depending on who you're talking to. You're either the CTO or the sales engineer or whatever. That kind of job titles are really a way for external people to make sense of who you are in an organization. But day to day, it was like doing whatever you needed to do, build servers, filling out RFPs, whatever. That you just did what you needed to do.
Yeah. Any lessons that's stuck with you from that time?
I think one, Dave was ex-military, so never be late was like a pretty big one. That respect for other people's time was something that was drilled into us. But the lessons were so many years. I think that's where I really developed my appreciation for customer first. It's like you just do what the customer needs you to do. You just do what's right. Like I remember doing, we had a customer that was in revenue, and they had a branch in Invercargill, and one day their interactive voice response server just shat itself, and so there was me on a plane and trying to figure out. Nobody had been doing the backup, so this is all big floppy disks, 100 of them or whatever it was. I can't remember how many was required for a backup. No wonder nobody did them, because who was going to swap out 50 disks? And but I had a backup from God knows how old it was, and I had to kind of reconstitute this backup, and it was it was 3 days doing 20-hour days. You just but you just had to get the platform back online. And it's like, I don't know, is that I don't know if that's normal these days. It's like
not so much. I think there are different expectations from of people, and maybe there's been a change in
but I don't remember getting to
for better or for worse, right?
Looking at my watch going, oh, it's 8 p.m. I should really knock it in for the night, and
just wanted to get it done.
Yeah, it was like, we just have to get this done for the client. And so just going until we found a solution. And there were times there it didn't seem like there was going to be a solution, but we just kept persevering and eventually figured something out.
Well, in those days, a lot of things that we take for granted in terms of business practices surrounding technology and risk mitigation, business continuity processes, and cybersecurity plans and so on. None of that really kind of existed to any great degree, did it? So that was probably why anybody involved in technology tend to get dragged into these things from time to time.
And we were all pretty much making things up as we went. The industry was, I guess the industry was fairly immature. In the sense that we were adopting technology pretty quickly, making it do things that had never been done before, and sort of nobody really had the playbook of what would come next. And so everybody was in constant catch-up mode.
Yeah.
And I think we still are, right? You're still chasing after AI or whatever the next wave is. And I don't think it's impossible for any person to stay up to date. You just have to find the right tools that help you navigate through it and solve the problem that you need to solve. But yeah, so coming back to the lesson is but always putting the customer first. It's like there's all these great ideas and great cool things that you could do and great technologies, but does it really solve the customer need? So I think that was the main thing I took away from that experience, and also, just what startup life was like without the label of it being a startup.
Yeah.
And ever since then, I've never had a real job. I think that was. Yeah. I used to say that was my only real job, but now I've actually realized that wasn't a real job either, because there was a startup.
Yeah.
So, and then after that, I did the OE thing and traveled for a few years. This was like year 2000. So I went over to the UK and earned some good contracting money, making sure that the world didn't end.
It's hilarious.
With the Y2K bug.
It's hilarious. I did some work in London to do with Y2K as well.
It was crazy. It was a crazy gravy train. It was just like, they were just like, and at the time they were just snapping up Australians and Kiwis who, were in the industry, because we were regarded as straight shooting, reliable people, and paying ridiculous money just to I can't even remember what we were doing, but all under the guise of just make sure that everything still works on January the 1st, and so I did that for a couple of years, and then came back, and then ever since then I've been running my own ventures, and with varying success, mostly failures, or actually no, shouldn't call them failures. What should call them is learning. So things that I know not to do again, and then eventually stuck with it and had a good success.
So how long was that period of learnings as
my whole life, it's ever since I was 10.
But from before you started Vend, where you were the learnings, the failures, obviously you survived during that period, but you hadn't landed on your kind of big thing at that stage. What sort of window of time was that?
Well, so that was, I came back in 2002, and then exited Vend or started Vend in 2010. Actually, it was more like 2019. 2009 was when really started working on Vend. So that's 7 years.
Yeah,
feels a lot longer of trying things and making things fail. But yeah, it would have been about that. And so, ran some agencies, that for a while, had a product that we built for one of our clients, spun that off into a product, its own company. And that didn't go so great, that we trade-saled that to TradeMe. And that's how I met Sam and Ryan and the rest of the TradeMe team at the time. And then, and that's kind of how Vend started, was, having very grateful for the support of some of those early TradeMe team who I think saw the crazy thing I could see, is that there was all these industries. This was happening at the same time as Xero doing the same thing in accountancy. It was like there were all these industries that were not being served or had not moved to the cloud. Software technology was serving them adequately, but nobody was really leveraging the advantages of the cloud, which were cost savings. But I think for some of the more sort of visionary folks, it was like, wow, yeah, it kind of makes sense. You can save a lot of money running a business on the cloud, but it's actually the interconnectivity of being able to connect with other things on the cloud is where the magic really happens, because then you can start to do things that you've never done before. And so that was kind of like the birth of Vend. It's like, well, we could do this for retail. And, it started off, we kind of landed somewhere different to where we started, or rather the idea did.
That seems to be incredibly common, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty normal.
A startup begins, you think you've got it all worked out in your head, and once you get into it, you you learn a whole lot about the particular space that you're in.
Yeah.
So what did that look like for you with Vend? How much of a change was there from the picture in your mind to what you ultimately ended up building?
Well, the original idea for Vend was
the pivot. Was it a pivot?
Well, I
Or
guess
not
you would
quite?
call it a pivot. We kind of ended up back there. It took
Yeah.
like 11 years to kind of get back there. But the idea was around what you would call now omni-channel commerce, which was like just that mixed method of being able to be a customer of a retailer, whether it's online or in store or a combination of both, which is kind of what we landed on during COVID, which was the idea of click and collect, and buy in store and have things shipped to you at home. So that mixed mixed retail. And because like at the time it just seemed obvious to me. I was like, why? Because retailers, I had my consultancy business, and I had a number of retail clients who were like, they had their in-store retail platform, which is point of sale and inventory management and things, and then they had an e-commerce platform, and they ran them as two completely separate businesses. And that just seemed nuts to me, because me as a customer, I wanted to know, my preference for the way I shopped was I like to do online research first. I like to validate or find that's how I make up my mind about the things I want to purchase. So for a pair of shoes or whatever it is. And then once I've made that decision to buy, then I want to know what's the fastest way I can get the product, or if I, how can I get the product in my hands to, make that last decision, which is like, yep, this is the thing I want. But nobody was doing that. Like, it was just not a thing. And so that's where the idea of Vend started, which was like, well, I want to build a platform that you can see where every piece of inventory is. You can see what price it is. You can see what other people have said about the products, sort of like that social graph for retail, and that you can buy any way you want. You can buy online and have it shipped to home, or you could buy online and pick up in store, or any combination of that. And so that's where we started. And I was like, wow, how hard could it be? And then very quickly realized that in order to reach that convergence, you really needed to bring those two platforms of e-commerce and in-store retail together. E-commerce was already starting to become natively on the cloud. And at the time, there was this neat little Ottawa startup called Shopify that was kind of doing the cool things about, multi-tenanted online cloud-based e-commerce. And I thought, wow, you could do the same thing in retail. We could have a multi-tenanted cloud-based retail platform that could run the whole in-store operations. And then started to break that down. I was like, well, inventory management, that's pretty similar to online and da-da-da-da. But then there was the one thing that people said that you could never do. You could never move to the cloud, which was the point of sale, because that's so mission critical. It's frontline. It needs to be running 24/7. You can't just have somebody unplug the modem and it go down. But it was also at the time where browser technologies like HTML5 meant that you could start, geeky speak, you could start building the databases in the browser. So you could basically build software that ran in the browser.
So if your internet connection dropped out, you were still
trading. Yeah,
right?
you were still trading. Maybe it disabled some features, like you couldn't obviously do live inventory lookups in multiple locations because you were offline. But you could do the most important thing as a retailer, which was make sales. And so I decided, well, that's where we're going to start. We're going to revolutionize the POS and prove that you could run that in the cloud. Built the prototype for that, gave it to a few retailers, and they all said, great, how much? And I was like, okay. Very quickly had to build the online sign up, the credit card form that you could take money off customers. And that was it. We built a prototype, and it was an idea. I remember some of our early customers saying, this is something that we've been waiting for years, because it seems obvious to them, but nothing existed.
So the existing POS or point of sale systems were just non-cloud. They were using more traditional.
You'd have a server in the back office.
Yep.
That again you would never back up, and so when the shit hit the fan, you're going to lost everything. Written in Fox Pro or something, and just was archaic. There was no innovation in it whatsoever. And so we essentially revolutionized the POS. We we had to replicate the functionality of like all these clunky old POSs. But once we reached that parity with what an old POS could do, we could then start adding all the cool new things, which was like, integrating into, multi-site inventory and integrating with e-commerce, and then doing things like, we were doing click and collect 10 years ago before it was even really a thing. But yeah, and then for then 10 years sort of took us to build everything else, with the integration. And at the same time, e-commerce was going off, and retail, even though we were the first, there were very quickly others in the space who were replicating what we were doing. And then I think it was year 2, this amazing device came out, which was called the iPad. And I remember getting, I think it was Lance Wiggs was smuggling them into the country because you couldn't buy them in New Zealand. You could only buy them in the US. And I think it was Lance who was like muling them back from San Francisco. And I remember it was myself and Dylan Bland met Lance at a cafe on High Street and did the deal where it was like exchanged the money and got the iPads. And the first thing I did was took it back to the office. I was like, we're going to use this thing. This thing's going to become the point of sale. And because we had built Vend in HTML5, it literally ran. Like it literally,
you could operate it off an iPad immediately.
We had to change some things to just make it work more for a touch environment. But touch screens were pretty common in retail, so that wasn't so much of a thing. It was more like getting it to fit the form factor of an iPad. And
so prior to that, it was a full-blown sort of PC.
Yeah. And then you could pick up however much iPads were at the time. I mean, they weren't that cheap, but they very quickly became quite cheap. Cheap compared to like a touch screen for a PC probably cost as much as the iPad. And which was the other game changer for retailers, because then not only did they have this really cool device that was internet connected, it looked great, and retail's all about, having that in-store experience. And these are retailers, and you'd see them, and you still see retailers with these old clunky systems, and they kind of have to hide them away, like build them into the counter so you can't see the POS, but then you can see the massive, PC that's kind of concealed under the counter. And they could get rid of all that, not only, with all the maintenance costs of, keeping a PC running and backing it up and upgrading it to a thing that just automatically backed itself up, automatically got software updates, looked great. And and that was we rode that wave for the first few years of being the first iPad POS.
So how did you, just rolling back a little bit, how did you fund things initially? What did that picture look like for you at the very beginning?
Yeah, well, the first couple of years was funded through savings. We just paid for things ourselves. I was running a software consultancy business on the side, and was kind of doing 50-50, doing contracts to basically put food on the table, and then any other spare hour was going into Vend to get that thing going. In fact, I don't, even though
bootstrapping, as we sometimes call it, right?
Yeah,
it's kind of.
I'm trying to remember like when it was, but at least for the first year, I don't even think I was an employee of Vend, because I wasn't taking it. Probably took a couple of years before I actually took a paycheck home. I was literally funding it from other things, and then I spoke to Sam and Ron from TradeMe and said, "Hey, look, I've got this idea, and it's working." We hadn't at that point didn't have a customer. We had customers, but none were paying. And the prototype was kind of becoming very, very quickly becoming the product. And so I pitched it to them and said, "Look, just need a bit of cash to, so we can start hiring people and getting this thing, more productized and on the market to be sold." And yeah, it felt like a very quick decision for them from memory. I'd worked with them through the TradeMe days.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, very, very grateful to have them on board right from day one. And then straight after they became investors, I remember getting a phone call from like a crazy German who just somehow found me on the internet, who was very interested in what we were doing, and had semi-regular phone conversations with him over a period of a year. And that crazy German turned out to be Christoph Jans from 0.9 Cap, which wasn't 0.9 Cap then. In fact, 0.9 Cap viewers is like one of the most successful SaaS investors in the world. he hadn't even really got 0.9 cap set up, but I think Vend became one of their first investments, and he did that deal pretty much over a phone call. Never met me. Invested our first, I guess you'd call it a Series A. We raised pretty close to $1 million from a German VC from the other side of the world who'd never met, and then that was it. We were off.
That's incredible. You must have been pretty convincing over the phone.
Well, I think it was the product that was convincing. I don't know. I think I maybe have been a detriment to it. But, I think now it just seemed like a very obvious idea. I talk to a lot of young founders now who are very passionate about the SaaS space. And, I just have to pinch myself because, we were like, the wave hadn't even formed yet. Like, we could see the way the industry was heading before the industry could. So we built something. It's all about timing. Everything's always about timing. Like, we were just in time for the industry to be ready. In fact, even then the industry wasn't quite ready. Like, in the first few years at Vend, we were really bringing on those early adopters, like those retailers who were savvy enough that they knew this was the future. And then very quickly, the rest of the industry, the rest of the bell curve caught up. Just started becoming normal, and everybody else started looking for it. But you talk to young founders now who want to build the new SaaS thing, the new Xero, the new Vend, and it's like most of the ideas have already been taken. It's like there's very few things left. I'm not to say that there isn't, but like if we were at the gold rush, like it's like everything was up on the table. You could pretty much pick an industry. Legal, retail, accounting, anything, and you could pretty much build a thing that had never been built on the cloud before.
I guess the opportunity today might be, rather than just all out building new software as a service, is maybe more towards applying artificial intelligence and automation type technologies, and maybe in the years ahead, sort of robotics to different sectors, right? So
absolutely.
I'm sure that there are some opportunities. They're going to be different and probably not as bigger.
Just the
scale,
famous last words, the easy ones.
Size of the big obvious. Well, for you it was obviously not. The way it comes across, it was a pretty obvious thing for you to join up some dots and to see that was a good opportunity at their time. So with raising that those funds early on, what did you find that came with raising venture capital? Because there's usually some strings, whether it's those are some of those things can be good, right? There's these opportunities to learn, and you get directed in good ways.
There's good and bad in everything. For us, venture capital gave us scale at speed, which was a good and a bad thing, right? It meant that capital wasn't a constraint, so we could hire people quickly and innovate quickly until the point where that can also create a bit of a noose around your neck as well, because if you work on that cycle of needing to continuously raise money to go faster, then you have to be prepared for the day when the capital is no longer available. The tap is no longer running and turned off. But that was how Rod did Xero, and so was kind of trying to emulate the Rod Drury playbook, even though that wasn't really a thing, because he was doing it slightly different and listed. But it seemed like the Silicon Valley playbook, right? Which was like, you just go get some VC funds, then money doesn't become an issue until 18 months later when you're running out of money, and then it becomes an issue again, and you repeat that cycle and you just go and raise again. So we can't remember how many rounds we did in total, but it felt like it was an 18-month cycle.
Just kept happening. And what happened when those things didn't align? Because that's one of the challenges, isn't it? When you build something that's where you are trying to run faster and faster, and there are all sorts of benefits of doing that. there's also some challenges if the funds don't come in when you want them, and that isn't necessarily a comfortable thing to go through. When I look back on different discussions I've had with founders, there can be some incredible pressure around the fundraising piece, and when it doesn't play out, there's some big lessons learned.
Yeah, I think the plan is really to have a plan B. Really, it's like what I'm seeing is a lot more maturity now with a lot of the founders I talk to. Even though they have a capital strategy, it's like, well, we're going to go raise a mil or whatever it is in order to fund our growth. If we can't do that, then this is the plan B for us to get to profitability. And I don't know if that's just a psyche change or whether it's very environmental at the moment, because there isn't a lot of capital flowing around. It's just the reality. We almost got caught by that because we felt like we had very easy access to capital. In fact, when we did a round, we felt like we were turning people away. But then we found ourselves in a situation where we were doing a big round, and then the pin got pulled on that. Well, the rug really got pulled on us at the 11th hour, and the amount of funding that we thought was going to be available was not available. And then you just have to course correct. And it probably turned out to be a painful experience, but probably was a good experience for us to go through, because we, in retrospect, had been growing quite fast. And, you can't just keep piling on people and growth and expect to continue to go faster. At some point, just by the size that you're growing to, it starts to slow you down. And it was a very painful experience for us because we'd only known growth and the opportunity. It wasn't because the opportunity had gone away or the customers were going away. That stuff, that just was the exciting thing. It was really that we had outgrown our supply of capital, really. So we had to course correct. And that feels like a natural cycle for businesses to go through. If everybody, it feels like the industry has kind of gone through a massive course correction recently, and it sucks. It totally sucks, because your biggest cost is your headcount, and that ultimately means that you're going to have to trim roll. I mean, you use all sorts of language about trimming roles, but the harsh reality is you're going to have to let people go. And these are people that you made a promise to. You said, look, come on board the rocket ship. We're going to do amazing things and everything's going to be great. And that's just the sucky side of growing a fast growth startup. The alternative is you go slowly, you only bring on people that you desperately need as you need them, and you fund it through growth, and there's nothing wrong with that model either. So,
but it depends on what space you're in, right? And my understanding is you're in a pretty competitive space because others came into
we couldn't have done it
to that
we
field
couldn't have done it that way
as well, right?
No,
so you had to go fast, otherwise you weren't going to end up with you weren't going to build a business, right?
No, maybe there was a way in between that we could have done it, but we couldn't have done the bootstrap because I can't remember how many competitors there were, but it felt like every other month there was somebody new popping up who was basically, we had competitors that were literally ripping off our website, literally ripping off all of our marketing assets and changing words and changing some of the pictures, but they were just copying everything we were doing. And so I don't think there was, because the space was so new and it was so exciting, and and then you had things like the iPad that was just rapidly transforming retail. I don't think we could have bootstrapped our way there. Maybe I'm just saying that because my bias is towards the path that we picked. So would I do it that way again? I don't know. I don't know if I would. I don't know. I don't know whether that's just the scars or whether it's just curiosity. Because I see a lot of really smart founders now who are making a deliberate decision to not do the Valley model, because it sucks. It really does suck, because then you're beholden to a whole bunch of VCs, and they want to have their 10x multiple applied to you. And if you don't deliver that, then you start to get real uncomfortable real quick. So yeah, I can't remember what the question was there, but that was just our experience.
Yeah. And when you look at some of those really, really difficult times, there must have been a mix. It wasn't all to do with money. What were some of the other challenging things that you went through? And I mean, even having to lay people off, how do you go through that with, as you say, people you've made promises to, you've encouraged people, hey, give up what you're doing, come and join us here at Vend, and then you haven't been able to keep all of them on.
I don't know if that stuff gets easy. I think you go through that process enough that is a process that that is the right one to run. I was talking to somebody the other day about kind of modern day redundancies, and it's not really a thing. Whereas like it felt very important to me that if we had to let people go, then we had to make it right by them, and that just seemed like the right thing to do. And but so people stuff is always the hard thing. Is letting people go who you desperately don't want to let them go, but there are factors that are conspiring against them being able to remain, usually cash. And then there's the flip side of that, which is like getting rid of people who really shouldn't be on board for whatever reason. It's never usually their fault. It's just usually it's a bad fit. That stuff's really hard. Then there's all that. There's like a long list, Paul. There's like the long list of like, how do you keep innovation going? How do you keep things moving fast? How do you constantly reinvent yourself? There's the innovator's dilemma, where it's like the thing you've been doing for the last 5 years is not necessarily the thing that you're going to need to do for the next 5 years in order to stay relevant. All that stuff. Like it's never static. The challenges are like month to month. It depends on how far out you want to zoom out or in. It's like it's a constant bevy of challenges that you're having to face. 90% of them are people. And so that's why, for me, it always comes down to like just being a decent human and treating people how you want to be treated. That doesn't make it pain-free, but it definitely makes everything just run a little bit easier. Helps you sleep better, and probably helps everybody sleep better.
But we're human; we don't even get all that stuff right all the time.
No, it's like even when you think you're getting it right, you realize that you fucked it up, and you've let somebody down. Because like it's just the human side of things, and that's the bit I've never really been able to wrap my head around. It's like, sure, it's great, I sold our business for $500 million, and it's a great outcome, but was it the best experience for everybody involved? Probably not. Like if I added it up, over 1,000 people, 1,000 people's lives that we impacted on the journey. I like to think 99% of that was positive, but still there was that percentage that, didn't have a great experience. And that's just me, that stuff always weighs heavily on me. But it's just part of, unless you're going to be a one-man or one-woman business, you're going to have to deal with people. And that generally is where a lot of the friction happens.
It's also a lot of the satisfaction in life, though, isn't it? So there's
absolutely. Even though I dwell on the negative side of things, it's like the amount of fun that we had. Yeah. We were chatting before coming on. It's like about the next thing, and it's like, well, would I do another thing? Probably. Would it be? Wouldn't be to make $1 billion. Maybe. Would it be to build something that's world changing? Yeah, that's a big part of it. I think that you get a lot of validation out of that. But if I'm honest, it's about the people. It's like the amount of fun that we had working with smart people, solving really chunky problems. It's just so invigorating. I really, really miss it. I really, really miss that. For the last 2 years since we sold the business, I've I've kind of been moping around the house, annoying Zoe and driving her nuts. And I think it's because I'm really yearning that thing, It's like just having a bunch of like-minded people who are really passionate about the same thing and just really want to solve hard problems.
So let's drill into that. The like-minded people. How, in your case, did you find people? How did you manage to build that team around you? Because along the way, I would look in, whether it was a visit to Vend or what have you, it seemed like there was a really, solid, tight team there. And obviously there's a lot of fun in that journey. How did you make that happen?
I have no idea. I think if I was to guess at it, I think we built this culture around Vend that, like a lot of the early vendors, and actually probably held true all the way through to just prior to when we sold. It's like people genuinely wanted to come and work at Vend because they'd heard about cool stuff that we're doing and the culture that we had built, and and the experience that they could get, all these things. Like it was just employer brand, which at the time I didn't even know that was a thing. It was like, Nick Holdsworth was, technically employee number one. He turned up. He'd like literally just turned up one day and said, "I've heard about what you're doing. I think it's cool. I want to come and help out." And I was like, "Awesome." Okay. Let's see what we can find for you to do. And he literally turned up to the office until I gave him a job, and then I think word got out and people just started hearing about us. We used to do crazy videos that we would post on the internet and like all these things. Like for me, it just seemed a bit weird. The work culture is like you wear a suit and a tie to the office. Like that's how I kind of grew up. My first job, I wore a suit and a tie, and that seemed a bit weird. It's like, why don't you just sort of be you? It's like, how does wearing a tie make you smarter? It doesn't. And so that was something that we embraced, which was that culture of be you.
Yeah.
And these days, I think it's become a lot more normalized.
Absolutely.
But back then, it wasn't. Like, we really wanted to embrace diversity and have people for who they were. And for me, it just seemed kind of crazy that people would have a work persona and and their genuine persona. They'd try and be two different people.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of fun around that, and then people just started knocking on the door, literally in the case of Nick and others, and just wanted to come on board. And then we raised money, and then we needed to like hire a bit more aggressively. And then I think you should probably talk to Kirsty and the team back in the day who were actually having to deal with the recruitment, but
the people
it felt like there was a long list of
yeah.
people who wanted to come and work at Vend. So that wasn't the problem. There was still the problem of like, how do you filter it down and find the right people? But yeah, I think that was the secret, is like respecting people, letting people be who they want to be. And yeah, just making sure that people were there for the right reasons and that they were genuinely excited about solving the problems that we were trying to solve. They weren't turning up for a paycheck. They weren't turning up because there was a pool table or a ping pong table. They were turning up because they really wanted to make a difference. And also because we were super fast growing. This is a lot of advice I give to young folk these days. It's like, you don't have to go and start your own startup. Go find somebody else who's got like, the rocket's just starting to take off, and jump on that rocket, and you'll learn so much in a year, 2 years, however long you can hang on. Just go do that. Learn a whole bunch of stuff until you've learned all the stuff that you need to know for you to go and do your thing. And that was kind of the environment we had at Vend. It was like nobody really had job titles. I mean, they probably did, but because we were growing quite fast, week by week, you could literally step into a new job every month because there was always something new that we needed to do.
Yeah, that's quite cool.
Yeah, it was cool. It was fun.
Yeah, plenty of opportunities to learn and grow and develop in that sort of environment.
Yeah, like I'm I'm more sort of reminiscing about the early days. Once you start to get to scale, then those opportunities tend to start to get locked down a bit more. Like the opportunities are still there, but then the pathways become a little bit more formalized. Like when there's 300 people, 400 people in the organization, you can't really just have everybody kind of doing whatever they want. You kind of need to put some parameters around that. But still, I think that's still held true, is that you could still come in at what you'd call an entry level position, and then there's a pathway. We've had a number of folks who are now having incredibly successful careers, who started off doing sales or on the help desk, and now they're like running engineering teams and running sales organizations. And like that's the stuff those are the things that I cherish more than anything else, I think, is just the journeys that we've been able to enable for so many people. And hopefully that Vend has been such a positive experience in their lives that that maybe it's given them opportunities that they wouldn't have otherwise have been able to capitalize upon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who were the key people or the key sort of skills that you had to tap into? Because starting out with just you and your experience, that's, that was always going to be sort of, finite to start with. Obviously that was going to grow over time. But when you're moving really fast, you can't just figure it all out yourself, right? You've got to tap into talented people that bring the experience and that have done things before you and so on.
Yeah. I mean, this is where I always forget somebody, because
don't need to mention the names necessarily.
But I feel like I need to, because like there was and that's kind of the cool thing. It's like, if you added it up in total, over 1,000 people.
Yeah.
And every single one of them has been a key person on the journey. I think it's just having that open philosophy of being open to get help from wherever you can find it. But that comes back to the point before about having a culture and an environment where people kind of, you've got your own gravity and people are starting to gravitate towards you. Because then when you hit the problem, which is like, shit, we need some experience that we don't have.
Yeah.
Then you've got somebody nearby who you can put into a role to help solve that problem. Or an investor who you've been talking to for like 18 months. And then when the need for capital comes around, you can light up that conversation and say, actually, now the timing's right for us. We need capital. How do we bring you on board? I'm a big fan of heads down, getting shit done. But I think that needs to be counterbalanced with you're constantly selling. You need to be constantly selling. Like this is something for founders, is you need to be constantly selling. Not literally pounding the pavement, knocking on doors, selling your product. Maybe you do, and you probably should do a bit of that to understand who your customers are and what the barriers are for them to come on board. But you should be constantly selling to the next employee, like who, the next investor. It's like you need to be telling the story and get everybody excited about this crazy thing that you're doing. And why is it so cool? Why is it so exciting? Why should they care? Especially in a place like New Zealand, because you never know who's listening. You could be at a barbecue telling the story about your crazy thing. And at that barbecue, there could be a couple of future, team members. There could be an investor. There could be a future director. Who knows, it's just something that I don't know if it's something that naturally Kiwis are great at, which is that constant, shameless self-promotion. But in my experience, I think it's a key element to that storytelling. It's like that bringing people along and telling the story and getting them excited about it. Not literally for customers or investors. It could just be for, building your employer brand. But and then knowing when the time is right to actually just heads down. We just need to get stuff done. It's balancing those two ideas at the same time.
And obviously there was a point where you had to lay people off. Were there any other sort of points where you look back on and realize that they were very pivotal and challenging points that if you hadn't have made the right call, it would have made a really big difference to the future when you look back and realize, I mean, even whether they were calls you look back on and go, oh, actually, if we'd gone the other way, it would have been even better.
There's probably hundreds of those. There's probably hundreds of those.
Yeah.
Like, I think a key one was when I, let myself go, as in, fired myself, stepped out of the CE role. I think that was pivotal for us. There were a number of reasons. Like, from a personal point of view, I'd just gone through a divorce, and had been running at this thing like at full tilt for like, at that point, 5 or 6 years, and was getting quite exhausted. And I just needed somebody else to come on board and hand the steering wheel over and go, look, you just take the wheel for a few years. I got shit to sort out. That was, I think, a pivotal moment for me personally, because that enabled me to grow as a person as well, hugely. It made me realize, and this is advice that I now very happily give to anyone who will listen, which is like, you need to be more than your startup. Like, it's tempting to put 18 hours a day into your thing, and the reality is that's probably what you'll do, even if I tell you otherwise, because we're just people. And it's like, and if the idea is so compelling, it'll be very hard for you not to think about it every waking moment. But make sure that you bring that balance in of like making sure you don't let your friendships lapse, and that you spend time with your family, and all these things, exercise, and all the things that my mum used to tell me, make sure you taking time to smell the roses, all that stuff, which is just like, it's just sage wisdom. It's like you need to be more than just your thing. It's like, you need to be a person, you need to be you. And so making sure you do that any way you can, which is just putting it in your diary, whether it's once a week, get a massage, have lunch with a friend, making sure you're at home for dinner, those sorts of things, I think are super important. So that was a key pivotal thing for me. What else? Then I guess ultimately making the decision just to let go and sell the thing. It's like, that was quite a hard decision. It feels like it should have been obvious, especially like, the way it sort of ended for us was during the pandemic. And then suddenly the world all realized that omnichannel commerce was like a thing that needed to happen. It was like, and it was like, it was super validating, because that was the idea that we then started, was way back in 2009, which was like this idea for omnichannel commerce. And it took 10, 11 years for the industry to catch up. But then all of a sudden it just became the norm. And then the phone started ringing and people started making acquisition offers to us. And, even though the number kept getting bigger, people would say it should have felt obvious, but no, it was like we still hadn't delivered on the big idea. Like, it felt like we just had finally gotten to the start line of the thing that we wanted to do when I founded the company, 10 years ago. And the potential was still ahead of us. But then, I guess it made sense from a numbers point of view. And also from a personal point of view, it was like, well, had been probably in burnout state for like consistently for, the last 6 years. I just wasn't sure how many more years I could keep going, because I hadn't really found that balance that I now tell people to go and find. I don't know if that's just a crazy founder thing, is like, that irrational thing where, I don't know, you just do it to yourself. It's like you just constantly push yourself until you've gone too far.
Yeah, I think we probably saw some more of that in COVID for people that maybe hadn't normally been in those sort of places.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a real thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that we're trying to change, like with the charity work that we now do. Working on the next generation of innovators, which is that saying, when's the best time to plant a tree? It's like 10 years ago. When's the second best time? It's like now. And we're working with a lot of young innovators, and we're talking about as young as 10. We work with kids, between the ages of 10 and 20, who they probably wouldn't use the label innovator, and we definitely don't use the word entrepreneur because I'm not a really big fan of that label. But these are just young people who want to change the world. They have an idea and they just want to see that idea turn into reality. And but having spent my entire career in the startup ecosystem, and in particular in New Zealand, where the startup ecosystem is challenging on a number of fronts. One, on scale, we're just tiny. But two, with the tall poppy and the lack of support that founders can get or not get. And so we're trying to find a way that we can create a more supportive pathways for young people, and to have it really in their knitting right from when they're young. It's like, I'm going to be an innovator, and it could be a 20-year journey, 30-year journey like me, however long it takes them. But it's something. I guess I'm trying to replicate my my journey from when that light bulb turned on for me when I was 10. It's like, how do you, I don't know, make that pathway shorter? Does it need to be shorter? Don't know. But how do you make it more fulfilling and probably more safe for young people? Because I think the net result will be much more vibrant ecosystem. One, from a diversity point of view, less folks that look like me doing cool stuff, because we don't need another crypto bro kind of, trying to solve a problem that doesn't need to be solved. But what we do need is, the world definitely has a growing list of challenges and problems. And, we just need a generation of people who feel passionately, not just feel passionately, but also feel enabled that they can step up and really solve those problems. So, yeah, I think that's probably been the most rewarding, the most pivotal thing for me, was when we decided to found the charity. It came from a very selfish place, because, we started the charity. This is the Pam Fergusson Charitable Trust, named after my mum. It came from I'd say it came from a selfish place because, at the time, Vend was struggling with, talent acquisition. And my theory was, like, if we want talent, then, it's a very shallow pool now, but we need to make that pool deeper. So we need to start working with young kids, and, in 10 years' time, then we can hire them. That's where it started. And then it really made me realize that that's not the problem. Like, the whole world's going to be driven by technology. And getting kids to be excited about technology is not really a challenge. It's, how do you enable them to become the crafters and the innovators of technology? That's the real challenge. So that's what we've been plugging away at for the last 9 years now.
That's
doing
cool.
That.
Yeah. And has that kept you, a little bit busier over these last couple of years? You had a bit more time to put on that side, because
a bit more time to put into that.
You've obviously pretty stretched at times with Vend, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've got an amazing team who work in the charity now, and they're way more talented than I'll ever be, and they're just taking that leaps and bounds. Like, that's a gnarly challenge that we're trying to solve, is like that, creating that innovation pathway for young people. It started with bringing STEM into the curriculum and into schools. Seemed a bit nuts that we weren't teaching kids technology in the classroom, when it was pretty obvious that every future job that they were going to move into was going to be one that used technology. So, we spent a number of years really around the education piece of just like how important that was and why that was the thing. And we worked with the Ministry of Education for years on helping that conversation. And now the problem we're really focusing on is, how do we enable teachers in the classroom to be those people who are going to teach kids technology? Because honestly, it freaks teachers out. Because the rapid adoption of technology in the classroom is like, they're suddenly having to learn skills that they just.
It wasn't part of their education.
No.
Yeah.
That wasn't part of the job description, literally.
Which in many ways is the same for all of us. But of course, if you're in that role of educating the next generation, hey, you need to be in the right place on that stuff and be keeping up to date.
And that's a challenge because, you know, our teachers are amazing and time poor, and then suddenly they now have to become technologists because they need to actually understand the stuff that they need to be able to teach the kids in the classroom, and the kids know more about it than they know. It's a super challenging space at the moment. So, you know, how do we just give them the confidence that they don't have to know it all? Because I don't know it all. Like the technology is changing so quickly. It's really, how do you know, it really boils down to forget about the technology. Like every year there'll be something new. It's how do you create the environment of curiosity and innovation, and that, you know, the kids will go find the technology and learn it and solve the problems. But how do you teach the more important things, which is failure? Like thinking you know the solution, giving it a go, and realizing that that's not the solution, and being okay with that. And that's actually not a failure. That's just a learning. You know, that's just part of the process. How do you get kids to embrace the kind of the weirdness that makes them weird? Like, they're not all going to become math geniuses or scientists or accountants or doctors or, you know, whatever these labels that we used to use. You know, the thing that might get them excited is doing stuff with their hands, or, you know, drawing, or, you know, telling stories, or inventing stuff. It's like, how do you get kids to connect with those things that get them excited, and then show them that there's pathways into like real world jobs that they can do that stuff for a living. You know, it's like, I think that would be the coolest thing, is if we can get kids excited about doing the things that they really, I guess it comes back to that thing we did at Vend. It's like getting people super excited, because I've just seen firsthand the power of having people who are super excited about the thing that they do. They'll literally run into the office every day because they're so excited. They just want to be there, and they just want to be with the people that they're working with, working on the problems that they're working on. If you could unlock that for every kid, you know, that's just the reality for them when they grow up. They can literally solve the world. They can literally work on the things that they want to work on. And you'll get 10x. You'll get 10x out of every kid. And just imagine how impactful that will be for the whole world, having hundreds of thousands of these, these, you know, innovators who, you know, just feel empowered to kind of do the thing that they're really excited about.
Okay, to finish up, we've got people listening in that are maybe part of building something, or they want to build something, be it the next Vend, the next, you know, innovative firm. What would be the advice that you would offer?
Just to stick with it. The reason I say stick with it, not just do it, because, you know, it's not a Nike slogan, is because it will get hard, and there'll be something that feels like a roadblock that's, you know, immovable. But if you stick with it, you'll you know, maybe that roadblock remains a roadblock, and just until you can, you know, learn the skills that then make it obvious of like how you'll get around it. So just stick with it. Like the other part of the other story you hear is, you know, the story of the overnight success, because you never really hear about success until it's a success. And that could be a 20-year journey, a 30-year journey, 5-year journey, don't know, however long it takes you. And that's just normal. That's just totally normal. For me, you know, Vend was a 10, 11-year journey from idea to exit, if that's going to be the measure of success. But, you know, there was like a 20-year backstory behind that. Yeah. And so
true.
It's just, it will take as long as it takes, but just keep going on it. Just keep going on it, because you'll learn something new. You'll meet some new people, you know, just stick with it. When the times feel like they are the darkest, well, you know, as soon as you give up, that's it. That's gone. You know, just keep working on it, and eventually you'll get through it.
Yeah. That's great. Oh, well, thank you very much, Vaughan. Really awesome to hear a chunk of your journey and your story and the Vend story. And yeah, congratulations on a great result with Vend.
Thank you.
I think we're looking forward to seeing what things you get stuck into next. and I'm sure there'll be a combination of things along the way in terms of people that you help and things that you nurture along. And if there's another big success story, then even better.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah,
I don't know yet what I've got the energy for at the moment, but we'll see.
Yeah. Oh, well, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right. Cheers. Thanks everyone for listening in. Catch you on the next episode. See ya.